Well, welcome to Job chapters 12 to 14. It's the longest of Job's speeches. It comes at the end of this round one of the three friends who've spoken to him. We've just seen in chapter 11 yesterday Zophar, the Naamathite, speak, and now Job replies. So just following through in our Bible reading scheme as a church, going through the book of Job. And the aim is just to give you some guidance and just to sort of help you as you read through. Recognising I found Job a bit baffling. I think many people do. And some of the speeches all sound the same, and yet actually there's progression, there's lots of great things, and you kind of need to see the wood and the trees. There are some wonderful trees, but we also need to see the big picture. Big picture in this passage is that it sort of divides into two. So there's Job's rebuke to his friends in 12 through to 13 verse 19, and then he cries out to God, and there's some really wonderful parts to that, as well as some deep despair as well, in 13 verse 20 to the end. So that's the big overview. Slightly more detail just to give you the structure. You've got the rebuke to his friends kind of goes. No, actually, let's just get into it. Let's get into the detail, because the structure will come out of that. This is a rough and ready video. Okay, we're not editing these or doing anything fancy with them. So sorry about all any mistakes and the rest of it. Right, so 12 verses 1 to 6 is where Job starts and reply to his friends. Biting sarcasm, verse 2. No doubt you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. But I have understanding too, and let me talk about what I'm seeing and experiencing. I'm the laughingstock, verse 4, of you. I, who called to God, and he answered me, a just and blameless man. I'm a laughingstock. Why? Because in the thought of one who is at ease, there is contempt for misfortune. It's ready for those whose feet slip. This is a really key verse, really key moment in the book, explaining the thinking, the worldview that Job used to have and that the friends have. And Job's exposing the bankruptcy and the cruelty of this way of thinking, because it's cruel because he's being laughed at, although he's God's friend and there's no reason for him to be being laughed at. Far from it. He needs comfort and encouragement through this difficulty. But it's also bankrupt because here he is, and he's blameless, yet he's suffering. They think, in their ease and comfort, verse 5, that misfortune means someone's foot has slipped. If it's slipping means going away from God, living away from God, not being God's friend. So it's a sort of it's this worldview where if you're God's friend, things will go well for you. If you're not God's friend, things won't go well for you. So if things aren't going well for you, you're not God's friend. That's the way the thinking goes. And if you're not God's friend, things will go badly for you. But look at verse 6. The tents of robbers are at peace, and those who provoke God are secure, who bring their God in their hand. Funny little verse, isn't it? A pocket-sized God. But they seem to be doing fine. So your worldview, oh my friends, is woefully inadequate. It's bankrupt, and it is cruel. I am suffering at your hands. And then verse 7 to 12, he sort of, the pronouns are second person singular, so you, but singular. And it's like Job is mimicking them. It's like they're speaking to him, but he's doing the speaking, if you get what I mean. So he's saying, look, you kind of say, but ask the beasts and they will teach you, the birds of heaven and they will tell you, or the bushes of the earth. Like, this is a simple thing to understand. But he's saying, no, you're so shallow. What you're saying is so shallow, it doesn't really make sense. I can't go and learn from it's not like that. And, it's not just does the ear test words and the palate test food. This isn't what I'm getting as I look around me. It's not simple. You're just being shallow here. And so verse 13 to 25, he sort of turns to what he can see, what he is experiencing, and that is that God is dangerous in his sovereignty and destructive. That's the case in creation. God has, verse 13, with God are wisdom and might. He has counsel and understanding, but he tears stuff down. And verse 15, if he withholds the waters, they dry up. If he sends them out, they overwhelm the land. It's natural disasters, isn't it? It's droughts, it's floods. Could add earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, all those kind of things that we see around us. Job's saying, look, it's not just a matter of fluffy bunnies and cute ducklings and lovely flowers. Yes, there are those things, but there's also the storm. And we need to account for that. And God is wild. And he's also wild in how he deals with the nations and with leaders. So leaders are there in verse 17 down, and then nations maybe verse 23 down. And God is doing the same kind of thing. There's chaos and evil allowed to happen, and leaders brought down, and all the mayhem that we see in the world politically is also what Job is seeing under God's hand. And so verse 1 of chapter 13, he says, look, my eyes have seen all this, my ear has heard and understood it. What you know I also know. Look, I know the system, I know what you think. I'm not inferior to you, but I need to speak to God, because I'm not getting anywhere with you. In your way of understanding the world isn't right. I desire to argue my case with God. We're going to pick that up again in verse 13. When he's back with his friends, oh, as for you, you whitewash with lies, worthless physicians that you are. Sounds a bit like Jesus, doesn't it? Look, you're just dishonest, you're deceitful. That's the big stress here in this section from verse 1 to 12. Look, you're a deceitful lot. You're like whitewashed tombs. Verse 7, will you speak falsely for God and speak deceitfully for him? Look, you're not being honest about what's going on, and that's not right. Therefore, verse 5, application, oh, that you would keep silent. That would be your wisdom. So Job's got some funny lines in this section, doesn't he? And so, because he can't get very far with them, verse 13 onwards, he wants to speak to God. He wants to do that. He knows it's going to be difficult. Verse 15. In fact, he's got to take his life in his own hands, hasn't he? Though he slay me, I will hope in him. He knows that he's godly, but he knows it's a risk to go before God, because if he's not in right relationship with God, then he'll be consumed. But he's willing to take that risk because he wants to relate to God, because he loves God, because he wants to draw near to him. This will be my salvation, that the godless shall not come before him. That's his kind of risk he's taking, that he's right, that he is blameless, that all that relationship with God in chapter 1, verse 1 to 5, was real and is real, and that there'll be a way through this. But in order to do this, verse 20 to 22, he kind of needs God to press the pause button, withdraw your hand from me, and do not let dread of you terrify me. Then call and I will answer, or let me speak, and you reply to me. So press the pause button, God, just take your hand from me and allow me to, let's have a conversation. Please, can we have a conversation about this so I can understand what's going on. Then in verse 23 down to 27, Job reflects on how sin is the root of the problem for him coming to God. How many of my iniquities are my sins? He's kind of asking here to know the extent of the problem. He knows sin's a problem, but he's sort of saying, in a sense, he's saying, God, can I have the bill, please? I want to know what the damage is. What exactly is my sin? Why do you hide your face and count me your enemy? Okay, tell me what I've done. I want me to understand just how big this problem of my sin really is. Why am I being treated so harshly? Will you frighten a driven leaf and pursue dry chaff? I feel utterly overwhelmed by you. Show me why this is right. And then there's a reflection on the misery of life, which is short and miserable. Lovely, well, maybe not lovely, but really striking images in verse 28. Man wastes away like a rotten thing. You know, the rhubarb leaves you put on the compost and come back and they're all shriveled up. That's what we're like. A garment that is moth-eaten. A flower that withers. Trev was telling me about roses that he has that were just so beautiful, and then the heavy rain we've just had, they just totally disappeared. That's what we are like. And like a shadow, verse 2. And verse 1 is the actual sort of explicit thing. Man who is born of a woman is few of days and full of trouble. So we've got a very short life. And God, why don't you just leave us alone for this short time? Just give us a tea break. Give us some time off in this short toil, he cries. And then he thinks about death. Well, there's hope for a tree. A tree can be cut down and regrow, but there's no hope for us. We've just got this life, and then that's it. But he has a hope. He has a longing in verse 13 to 17. And here's maybe where just some of the gold is as we reflect on this. He's longing for resurrection. He says, look, would you hide me in Sheol and conceal me until your wrath is past? And then appoint a time and remember me. I know I'm asking a lot. This isn't normal. God, verse 14, if a man dies, shall he live again? But I really long for a renewal. What a lovely way to talk about the resurrection, a renewal. You would call and I would answer you. You would long for the work of your hands. It's a restoration of relationship most of all. You see, Job doesn't want his riches back, or even his family back, as much as he wants God back, as much as he wants to know God again. And then verse 17, my transgression will be sealed up in a bag and you will cover over my iniquity. I'm really out of routine with this lockdown. Still, Sunday nights I used to come back from church and put the bins out. I still keep forgetting and haven't got a new routine. However many months on now. That's the image here. Putting the bins out. God's going to put all our sins in the bin, and the bin man's going to come and collect it, and it's going to go away. So what a wonderful picture of forgiveness from God. So it's like a bright ray of sunshine bursting forth this dark chapter. But then, verse 18, suddenly the clouds roll in again. And Job is basically saying, look, if there's no resurrection, there's no hope. But he's fearing that maybe there is no hope again. He's back to being downcast. Look, it's just inevitable. The mountains fall and crumble away. Like erosion happens over time. You can't resist God's judgments against us. And people come to the grave, and that's it, and their children mourn for them, and that's the end of it. So, quick things. We see the shadow of Jesus here, don't we? He was dismissed. He was dismissed as being a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of sinners by the religious authorities. Yet he identified with us. He came into the world to be made sin for us and identified as a sinner and died. And so in these chapters we have words that kind of get inside, if you like, the man of sorrows and help us to see what Jesus went through. And of course in him we know that he was raised from death, and this hope of the resurrection and of forgiveness of sin and sin being dealt with, because that's the big problem, isn't it? How many are my iniquities and my sins? The answer to sin, death and resurrection and relationship with God being restored is all in Jesus. So that's the big thing to really take on board, isn't it, and to see in this chapter. But I guess also we're seeing a shadow of what it's like to be a believer. There's no system to make sense of life. There's just God who is sovereign. He's dangerously sovereign, but he's also trustworthy and good, and we can see that more maybe than Job can because of Christ. We experience short lives. They are filled with pain, and we face death. And so there's much that speaks truly of our experience as believers too in this chapter that can maybe connect for us and help us express the feelings, the thoughts that are in with us. And yet there's that great hope, isn't there? And we know we can have a solid and certain hope that Job just kind of was wishing for, of forgiveness, of that bin bag of our sin being removed away, of resurrection and life with God forever. Oh, that we would long above all things that God would call and that we would answer him, that he would long for the work of his hands. May that be our real desire.